The courtroom fell completely silent. Everyone watched as Gene Deal, Diddy's former head of security for over 15 years, pointed directly at his one-time boss and said the words that would change everything. "I saw him do it. All of it. And I have proof." Diddy's face went from confident to terrified in seconds. His attorneys frantically began whispering to each other. The prosecution team couldn't hide their smiles. This was the moment they had been waiting for. If you're new to our channel, make sure to like and subscribe for more breaking coverage of high-profile cases like this one. We bring you the real story behind the headlines. Nobody expected Diddy's most trusted protector to become his most damaging accuser. The room was tense as John Deal took the stand. A mountain of a man who had once intimidated anyone who came too close to his famous employer. Eyes focused on this security professional until he started revealing secrets he'd kept for nearly 2 decades. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even the judge froze. No announcement, no warning, just Gene Deal calmly describing horrors he had witnessed while on Diddy's payroll. Until that moment, Diddy had appeared relaxed during the trial, often smiling and whispering to his attorneys. But something had changed. Maybe it was seeing the man who knew all his secrets ready to speak freely. Maybe it was knowing that someone who had been in the room during his most private moments was now sitting across from him. Maybe it was the realization that the one person he thought would never betray him was about to do exactly that. Whatever it was, Diddy was done pretending. He wasn't sitting there as a celebrity anymore. He was there as an employer who had trusted the wrong person with too many secrets. A man who suddenly realized the walls were closing in. And when Gene Deal began to speak, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear. Because what Diddy's former bodyguard revealed about private parties, alleged criminal behavior, and systematic abuse wasn't just explosive. It was a first-hand account from someone who had been paid to keep these secrets hidden forever. It started like any other day of the trial. The room buzzed with low conversations. The press hunched in their designated rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for the next witness to be called. But when John Deal's name was announced as the next witness, the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a publicity stunt. But the way Gene Deal walked to the stand, with purpose in his stride and determination in his eyes, told everyone this was real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Diddy, who'd been casually leaning back in his chair, suddenly looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The color drained from his face. His hands, which had been confidently taking notes throughout the trial, froze mid-sentence. John Deal took his seat at the witness stand without making eye contact with anyone. He didn't even glance at Diddy, who was now sitting up straight, eyes wide with what looked like panic. "I'm here to tell the truth about what I witnessed," Gene Deal began. "I've been carrying these secrets for too long." The judge allowed it. And from that moment on, the entire trial shifted because what John Deal was about to say wasn't part of any media narrative. It wasn't a social media leak. It was something that had been carefully guarded by a small circle of employees who had been paid very well to stay silent. Diddy's attorney immediately objected, arguing that Gene Deal had signed multiple non-disclosure agreements and questioning his credibility as a witness. The prosecutor calmly explained that NDAs don't cover criminal activity, and that Deal had been thoroughly vetted as a witness. After a brief sidebar, the judge overruled the objection and instructed Deal to continue. The courtroom was completely silent, with reporters frantically typing every word. Even the court artist had stopped drawing to listen. Diddy's family members in the gallery exchanged worried glances, while the prosecution team reviewed their notes with renewed confidence. John Deal adjusted his tie and looked directly at the jury. What I'm about to share with you isn't based on rumors or second-hand information. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I was paid to make sure no one else did. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Diddy's lead attorney stood up to object again, but Diddy himself grabbed his lawyer's arm, stopping him. It was as if he already knew what was coming and wanted to hear how much his former confidant was about to reveal. The prosecutor approached, with several evidence folders, presenting them as exhibits. Your Honor, Mr. Deal has provided documentation that corroborates his testimony, including employment records, security logs, and photographs that place him at the locations in question. The judge examined the evidence logs and nodded. You may proceed. Jean Deal took a deep breath and began to speak. The words that followed would change everything. I've kept a lot inside for a long time, Jean Deal said. I've protected celebrities across the industry for over 25 years. I've worked with the biggest names in entertainment. But nothing compares to what I witnessed while working for Sean Combs. He turned directly toward Diddy. You made me complicit. Jean Deal told the courtroom that it started, like many employment relationships do, with a straightforward job offer. It came through a security agency that specialized in celebrity protection. The way they framed it, it was supposed to be a prestigious position with excellent pay. They said I'd be head of security for one of the biggest names in music. The salary was double what I'd been making. I'd been in the military and then private security for years, so I thought I knew what I was getting into. But the moment Jean Deal arrived at Diddy's mansion for his first day, he knew something was different. The house was massive, with separate wings and hidden rooms. Staff moved around nervously, avoiding eye contact. The other security personnel spoke in hushed tones. The second he asked about standard security protocols, he was pulled aside by the departing head of security. That should have been the first red flag. They said it was for confidentiality, to protect Mr. Combs's privacy. But it felt like something else, like they didn't want normal security procedures that might create records. He was gradually introduced to more aspects of the job. The requirements were unusual for celebrity protection. There were strict instructions about which guests could leave events and when. It felt like someone was always being watched, not just for their protection, but for control. Jean Deal said that after 2 weeks on the job and several private events, Diddy approached him directly. He said something like, "You don't just work for me. You work for the brand. Nothing you see leaves these walls." And he smiled. That smile, it wasn't warmth. It was ownership. At the time, I was supporting my family and had just purchased a new home, Jean Deal continued. The money was too good to walk away from. But I also wasn't comfortable with what I was seeing. So I started keeping my own records, my own insurance policy. He explained how he began documenting events, conversations, and incidents in a private journal, eventually backing up his observations with photographs and videos taken discreetly on his phone. I wasn't planning to use this information for anything specific. It was self-protection. If something happened, if someone got hurt, I didn't want to be the only one held responsible. The judge asked if Deal had been required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Yes, Your Honor. Multiple NDAs, updated almost yearly. Each one broader and more restrictive than the last. By 2015, I was essentially signing away my right to speak about anything I witnessed, even if it was criminal activity. Diddy's attorney argued that the evidence was inadmissible due to these NDAs. The prosecutor countered that NDAs cannot legally prevent someone from reporting crimes or testifying in criminal proceedings. After considering both arguments, the judge ruled that Deal's testimony and evidence would be allowed, but only as it directly related to the criminal charges. Deal explained that he'd turned over his documentation to federal investigators 3 months earlier, after seeing the surveillance video of Diddy assaulting Cassie in the hotel hallway. That video matched exactly what I had witnessed many times. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was business as usual. As the prosecutor prepared to show the first piece of evidence, a security log from 2008, Diddy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney passed him a note, which he read with a grimace. No one in the courtroom was prepared for what they were about to learn. The prosecutor displayed the first exhibit on the courtroom screens. It was a security log with Gene Deal's name and signature, dated March 15, 2008. The log contained entries like 3:15 a.m., female guest attempting to leave, detained in East Wing per boss instructions, and 4:20 a.m., subject calmed and returned to main area after boss intervention. John Deal explained that detained and boss intervention were euphemisms used in the security team's documentation. We were instructed never to write explicitly what happened, but detained meant physically preventing someone from leaving, and boss intervention typically meant Mr. Combs would threaten, intimidate, or sometimes assault the person until they complied with his wishes. The prosecutor showed another log, this one from 2010. Deal identified his handwriting in the margins, where he had made personal notes. Third time this month, same pattern. Need to discuss protocol with team. Deal explained, "After the first year, I realized we weren't providing security in the traditional sense. We were enforcers. Our job wasn't to protect Mr. Combs from outside threats. It was to protect him from consequences." The prosecutor asked Deal to elaborate on what he meant by enforcer. "We were instructed to confiscate phones at the door of any private event. Guests who were specially invited by Mr. Combs himself would often have their drinks or food laced with substances without their knowledge. If they tried to leave early, we were told to prevent them from doing so, using physical force if necessary. If anyone threatened to report what happened, we were sent to handle the situation." Deal described how Diddy would host what were internally referred to as special events at his homes in Miami, Los Angeles, and New York. These weren't just parties. They were orchestrated scenarios where certain guests, usually young women trying to break into the industry, would be isolated, intoxicated, and then put in situations they hadn't consented to. The prosecutor showed a series of photographs that Deal had taken, showing various security team members blocking exits, confiscating phones, and in one disturbing image, carrying what appeared to be an unconscious woman through a hallway. This was from a party in Miami in 2012, Deal identified. The woman had tried to leave after she realized what kind of event it really was. She was given a drink by one of Mr. Combs's assistants, and within 30 minutes, she could barely stand. I was instructed to have her moved to a private room where Mr. Combs would talk to her later. Deal's testimony grew more disturbing as he described the systematic nature of these events. There was a protocol for everything: how to identify potential targets, how to separate them from their friends, which team members would serve the doctored drinks, which rooms to use for which activities. It was a well-oiled machine. He explained that certain staff members had specific roles. There were procurers who would identify and invite young women. There were handlers who would stay close to them at events. There were cleaners who would come in afterward to remove any evidence. And there were fixers who would follow up with anyone who might cause problems later. Deal testified that he was part of the security infrastructure that enabled all of this to happen. "My team controlled who entered, who could leave, and who had access to their phones or other recording devices. We created a sealed environment where Mr. Combs could do whatever he wanted without fear of exposure." The most damning evidence came in the form of a video Deal had recorded secretly on his phone in 2015. The video showed Diddy in a heated argument with a woman who was trying to leave a party. Diddy could be heard saying, "You don't leave until I say you leave. Do you know what happens to people who cross me? They disappear." The woman, whose face was blurred in the court presentation, was crying and saying she just wanted to go home. Diddy responded by grabbing her arm roughly and telling someone off camera to take her phone and make sure she understands the situation. Deal explained, "I recorded this because I knew someday someone would need to know the truth. This wasn't an isolated incident. This happened almost every month for the 15 years I worked for him." As more evidence was presented, a pattern emerged of intimidation, coercion, and abuse that spanned more than a decade. The security logs, photographs, and videos corroborated many of the allegations made by previous witnesses, providing documentation of behaviors that had previously been testified to but not verified by someone inside the operation. Halfway through the presentation of the evidence, Diddy was visibly agitated. He had been writing furious notes to his attorneys, who looked increasingly concerned. Several times, he shook his head or whispered, "That's a lie," just loudly enough for the front rows to hear. The prosecutor asked Deal about his decision to come forward now. What changed after 15 years of silence? Deal looked directly at Diddy. "When I saw the hotel video of him assaulting Cassie, I recognized that behavior immediately. I had seen it dozens of times, but seeing it on video, knowing the public could finally see what I had been witnessing for years, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had been telling myself that I was just doing my job, but I realized I had been enabling abuse, and I couldn't live with that anymore." As Deal continued to describe specific incidents, dates, and locations, connecting them to other witness testimonies, Diddy's composure began to crack. His face flushed, and he loosened his tie, whispering urgently to his legal team. The courtroom watched as the man who had portrayed himself as a victim of false accusations throughout. The trial was confronted with evidence from the person who had once been paid to protect his darkest secrets. John Deal said he followed Diddy into many private rooms over the years, thinking they were going to discuss security concerns. Instead, what he saw shook him to the core. There were young women who looked disoriented and confused. Some I recognized from music videos or modeling campaigns. Some looked frightened and tried to make eye contact with me for help. There were others, watching and sometimes recording. And Diddy? He was directing everything like it was the most normal thing in the world. He paused, swallowing hard. I didn't know how to leave the job. And that was the point. Once you're in, you're in. Deal continued, his voice steady but hollow. A few days after witnessing a particularly disturbing incident in 2011, I got a call. Blocked number. All the voice said was, "The boss knows you've been asking questions. Remember your NDA and your family." Then they hung up. He thought it was just an empty threat, until a package arrived at his home address. It was unmarked. Inside was a USB drive. I almost didn't look, but I did. It was footage of me helping to detain a woman who was trying to leave a party. I don't remember actively participating, but there I was, standing by the door blocking her exit. There was a voice behind the camera, Diddy's voice, saying, "Now we both have something to lose." Deal testified that the fear he felt in that moment was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. I realized I wasn't just employed. I was compromised. He explained that this was when he began to systematically document everything he witnessed. It wasn't just for my protection anymore. I knew there were victims who had no voice, no power, no way to fight back. I thought if I collected enough evidence, someday there would be accountability. The prosecutor displayed more security logs and personal notes from 2012 through 2020, each one revealing aspects of how Diddy allegedly maintained control over not just the victims, but his own staff. There were text messages from Diddy instructing Deal to handle situations, emails discussing cleanup at various properties, and photographs of what Deal described as morning after scenes showing destroyed rooms and discarded women's clothing. 1. Text message from 2016 from Diddy to Deal read, "Need full sweep of Miami house, all devices, all rooms. If anything recorded, find it and destroy it. No exceptions." Deal explained how the operation expanded over time. It started with parties at his homes, but eventually there were hotel suites, rented houses, even yachts. Anywhere he went, the ETO, same system would be implemented. Phones collected, exits monitored, substances available, and a team ready to handle any problems. The prosecutor asked about specific incidents involving other celebrities or industry figures who had allegedly participated or witnessed these events. Deal named several high-profile individuals who had been present, some as participants and others as seemingly uncomfortable observers. Not everyone participated, Deal testified. Some people would leave immediately when they realized what was happening. But most stayed quiet because they feared being blacklisted or worse. Mr. Combs would often remind people, "I make careers, and I break them too." He described how Diddy would use a combination of generous gifts, career opportunities, and implied threats to keep people loyal. He'd pay bonuses for particularly difficult situations, invite you on his yacht, make you feel like part of his inner circle, and then casually mention someone who had been fired and was now unable to find work anywhere in the industry. The message was always clear: stay loyal or suffer. The recordings and documentation also revealed conversations about specific incidents that aligned with allegations in the criminal case. There were discussions about paying off potential witnesses, destroying evidence, and coordinating stories to protect Diddy's reputation. As this part of the testimony continued, several jurors were visibly disturbed, taking extensive notes. Diddy's VE agitation had given way to a cold, hard stare directed at his former head of security. Deal concluded this portion of his testimony by explaining his own role in the system. "I was complicit. Every day I stayed in that job, every time I prevented someone from leaving, every time I looked the other way, I was part of the problem. I can't change that. But I can tell the truth now and hope that it helps the victims. Find some justice." Deal said, "That's when the personal threats began. I started getting strange calls in the middle of the night. My wife noticed cars parked outside our house. My children's teachers reported unfamiliar men asking questions about their schedules. I knew what it was. It was pressure. Diddy didn't need to say it directly. He just made it clear that my family's safety was the cost of my continued silence. And so for years, Deal said he performed his job while secretly documenting everything. He smiled through staff meetings, brushed off concerns from his wife, and focused on protecting his family. But every time I saw a news story about someone accusing Diddy, Cassie, the male producer, all the others, I thought, if they're speaking, why am I still quiet?" He looked around the courtroom. Diddy didn't just hurt these women. He corrupted everyone around him, made us all complicit in his actions. And that, Deal said, was what finally brought me to court. Deal paused, glanced at the jury, and leaned closer to the mic. "It wasn't just the job. That was the trap." He said, from that moment on, everything he did felt like it had strings attached to it. He explained that the compensation structure ensured his silence. "My base salary was good, but the real money came from bonuses tied to special events and situation management. If I left, Not only would I lose that income, but I knew I'd be blacklisted across the industry. And there was always the implied threat that if I spoke out, the evidence of my own involvement would surface. He said this didn't happen once or twice. It became a pattern. Diddy didn't have to explicitly threaten people. He had systems that did it for him. Lawyers with NDAs, accountants with bonus structures, security teams with compromising evidence. He knew how to create a web where everyone was implicated. Everyone had something to lose. The prosecutor asked Deal about a specific incident in 2018 when he considered quitting. What happened that made you want to leave? Deal described an event where a young woman was so heavily drugged that she stopped breathing. We had to call a private doctor in the middle of the night. No hospitals, no official report. The doctor revived her, and she was sent home the next day with a gift bag that included $25,000 in cash and another NDA. I told Mr. Combs I couldn't do this anymore. Deal described Diddy's response. He took me into his home office, pulled up my mortgage information, my kids' college funds, photos of my family, and said, "This is what you're walking away from. This is what you're putting at risk. Are you sure?" The prosecutor played a recording Deal had made of a conversation with Diddy from 2019, in which Diddy could be heard saying, "You know too much to ever leave this family, John. Either you're with me all the way, or you're against me. There's no middle ground, and you don't want to be against me." Deal explained that as rumors of investigations began to surface, the operation became more careful, but didn't stop. We switched to using more remote properties, more rigorous security protocols. Staff were compartmentalized so fewer people saw the whole picture, but the behavior continued. He described watching from inside as allegations against Diddy began to surface publicly. When Cassie filed her lawsuit, everyone on the inside knew it was true. We had all seen it happen, but we were all instructed to deny everything, to discredit her, to make it seem like she was just looking for money. The prosecutor asked, "What made you decide to finally turn your evidence over to federal investigators?" Deal's voice dropped to a quieter, deeper tone. "I stayed quiet for 15 years. I convinced myself I was protecting my family, that speaking out would put them at risk. But then the hotel video started to surface. He said the first time he saw the surveillance footage of Diddy assaulting Cassie, he recognized the pattern immediately. Then I got a call from another security team member. He said, 'John, they're trying to buy the hotel footage. They're calling in favors with police. This might disappear.' And I knew I couldn't be silent anymore." He described feeling like the floor had dropped from under him. "I didn't even know hotel surveillance footage existed, but once I realized it might be suppressed, I knew all the evidence I had collected might be the only chance for justice." Deal said he stayed up all night reviewing his documentation. The security logs, the photos, the recordings, the text messages. It was all there, a complete record of years of abuse, and I was the only one who had preserved it. He said the breaking point wasn't fear, it was guilt. I realized that if I didn't speak now, more people would be hurt. My silence would enable more abuse, and I couldn't live with that. My children are going to learn about this case someday. I wanted them to know that in the end, I did the right thing. He told the court he contacted the FBI himself. I told them, "I have evidence going back 15 years. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them." He looked at the jury. I wasn't just a witness. I was an enabler. I watched and I documented and I stayed silent. Then he looked at Diddy again, this time with a sharper tone. "And you knew I saw everything." For his final statement, the judge allowed Gene Deal to speak directly to Diddy. He stood from the witness chair, walked a few feet closer, and looked him in the eye. "You built an empire out of fear," he began. "You called it loyalty. You called it family. You called it the bad boy way. But all you built was a criminal enterprise that destroyed lives." Diddy didn't respond. He sat there motionless, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Deal didn't blink. "I saw what you did to those women. I saw what you did to anyone who defied you. I heard the things you said when the doors were closed. You hurt people for pleasure and power." Then Deal pulled something from his pocket. His original employment contract from 2005, yellowed and creased. "This was the day I sold my integrity, right before I first witnessed what you were really doing. That's the day I became part of the problem." He held it up to the court. "I've carried this as a reminder of what happens when good people stay silent." Deal turned to the jury. "If you think this is just about parties or celebrities or lifestyle, you're not seeing the whole picture. This is about powerful men creating systems to abuse vulnerable people. And if we don't hold them accountable, it will keep happening." Then he faced Diddy one last time. "You once told me, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Well, the truth matters more." He walked back to the stand, collected his notes, and waited to be dismissed. And Diddy? He sat there rigid and pale, unblinking, his fingers gripping the edge of the table, because for the first time in his trial, he was facing someone who couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be bought, and couldn't be silenced. The prosecutor asked one final question. "Mr. Deal, given everything you've testified to today, do you believe Sean Combs poses a continuing danger to others?" Deal didn't hesitate. "As long as he has money and influence, yes. The system he built still exists. The people who helped him are still out there, and the victims are still afraid. The only thing that's changed is that now there's evidence." As Deal was excused from the witness stand, Diddy suddenly stood up. The courtroom tensed. Security officers moved closer. But before anyone could react, Diddy shouted, "You betrayed me! After everything I did for you!" Deal stopped and turned. "No, Sean. You betrayed yourself when you thought your money and fame put you above the law." The judge immediately called for order. Diddy was physically restrained by his own attorneys and court officers, struggling against their grip as he continued to shout accusations of betrayal and lies. The spectacle of the once composed music mogul losing control in open court shocked everyone present. The judge ordered a recess, and Diddy was escorted from the courtroom by his legal team. The last image before the doors closed was Diddy's face, contorted with rage and fear, as the man who had once been his most trusted protector walked away, finally unburdened of the secrets he had carried for 15 years. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, having heard about the explosive testimony. When Deal emerged, there was a moment of silence before questions were shouted from all directions. He raised his hand for quiet. "I have nothing more to say beyond what I testified to today. This isn't about me. It's about the victims and justice." With that, he walked to a waiting car, flanked by federal marshals providing protection. A reporter shouted, "Are you afraid of retaliation?" Deal paused briefly before getting into the car. "I've been afraid for 15 years. Today is the first day I'm not afraid anymore." The car door closed, and he was gone. When John Deal stepped down from the witness stand, he didn't look like someone who had won anything. He looked like someone who had finally unshackled himself from years of moral compromise. The courtroom was still reverberating from Diddy's outburst, almost unsure how to process what they had witnessed. Even the Judge looked shaken by the intensity of the confrontation. Some of the jurors had been visibly affected, with several wiping away tears, and Diddy, after being removed from the courtroom, had reportedly continued his tirade in a private conference room, before finally being sedated by a physician. Deal didn't speak to the press when he exited. He didn't gloat, didn't posture. He walked out the front of the courthouse with his head held high, but his shoulders carried the weight of 15 years of witnessed trauma. When asked later by reporters if he feared for his safety, he reportedly responded, "The truth is my protection. Now, you can't threaten someone who has nothing left to hide." But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to react. The security industry went into a quiet panic. Executive protection agencies called emergency meetings. Security firms paused contracts with certain high-profile clients. Associates who had once publicly supported Diddy were now issuing boilerplate statements of shock and distance. Behind closed doors, crisis management teams were activated. PR firms sent internal memos urging clients to review their security protocols and NDAs. And while many tried to pretend they were shocked, the internet was already doing what it does best, connecting dots that had been visible for years. Old photographs resurfaced showing Deal in the background at Diddy's events, always watchful, always present. Security logs that had been leaked years earlier were re-examined with new understanding. And most painfully, previous accusations that had been dismissed as extortion attempts were being revisited with new credibility. Fans weren't just shocked. They were furious. Furious that someone like Deal had been part of the system. Furious that for years legitimate concerns had been buried under legal threats. And furious that the entertainment industry had enabled such behavior for so long. The era of unquestioning protection was over. Diddy's legal team filed for a mistrial, claiming Deal's testimony was prejudicial and his evidence should have been excluded due to the NDAs he had signed. The motion was denied. The judge ruled that the testimony was admissible and relevant to the criminal charges, and that non-disclosure agreements cannot legally prevent testimony about criminal activity. Legal. Experts weighed in on how Deal's evidence might impact the case. Criminal defense attorney Marcia Johnson told CNN, "This testimony is devastating because it comes from inside the operation. This isn't an alleged victim who could be dismissed as having ulterior motives. This is someone who was paid to protect the defendant and instead documented years of alleged criminal behavior." Former prosecutor Thomas Reynolds added, "The prosecution has built a case that shows not just individual incidents, but a systematic pattern of behavior spanning decades. Deal's testimony and evidence provide the infrastructure that connects all the individual allegations into a coherent criminal enterprise." Back in the courtroom, as the trial resumed, Diddy appeared noticeably different. His designer suits were replaced by more conservative attire. His previous confidence was gone, replaced by a wary watchfulness. His family's presence in the courtroom had diminished, with only his mother attending regularly. The prosecution continued to present evidence, now contextualized by Deal's testimony. Other former employees came forward, many under subpoena, to confirm aspects of Deal's account. The defense strategy shifted from outright denial to suggesting that while some behavior may have been inappropriate, it didn't constitute criminal conduct. His attorney argued that Deal had financial motives for collecting and preserving evidence, suggesting he had always planned to use it for leverage or profit. But the damage had been done. The jury had heard from someone who had been in the room, who had documented the alleged crimes as they happened, and who had finally chosen to speak, despite the personal cost. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the implications extended far beyond Diddy himself. Other celebrities began facing increased scrutiny about their security practices. Questions were raised about the ethics of non-disclosure agreements that covered potentially criminal behavior. The public conversation shifted from shock about one man's actions to outrage about an entire system that had protected powerful abusers. When the verdict finally came, after 6 weeks of testimony and 4 days of jury deliberation, it was decisive. Guilty on all counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation for prostitution. The judge set sentencing for 2 months later, with Diddy facing potential decades in prison for the most serious charges. As he was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, Diddy looked nothing like the music mogul who had built a billion-dollar empire. He looked like what the jury had determined he was: a criminal who had used his power to victimize others and silence witnesses. Outside the courthouse, John Deal made a brief statement. "Today isn't a victory for me. It's the beginning of healing for the victims. I regret every day that I didn't speak sooner, but I hope my testimony helps ensure that powerful men can no longer build systems of abuse and silence." The case would go on to inspire significant changes in the entertainment industry. Security. Firms implemented new ethical guidelines and whistleblower protections. Legislators introduced bills to limit the scope of non-disclosure agreements in cases of alleged criminal conduct. Victims' rights organizations reported increases in calls from people in the entertainment industry seeking help. But perhaps the most profound impact was simpler. It showed that even the most carefully constructed systems of silence could eventually crumble when one person decided to tell the truth. If you found this story informative, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you in-depth coverage of important stories that others might miss. Your support helps us continue this work. Thanks for watching.